Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with Eyes on Eye Care. My name is Jessilin Quint. We're here together for the next hour to talk about all things practice management, what I'm implementing. Hopefully you'll walk away with some fun tools. We did reserve some time at the end of this for some Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, drop those in the chat and we'll be sure to leave enough time to kind of cover those because I want to talk to you. I want to know what's going on and clarify any questions that you may have. If you don't know me, I'm obviously an optometrist. I'm a Texas native, did my undergrad at Baylor University, loved Baylor so much. My golden retriever's name is Baylor. I went to optometry school at Indiana University, go Hoosiers, did my residency at ICO at the Illinois Eye Institute. And then after that, landed in the beautiful state of Maine and have been there for like 7.5, 8 years. It all starts to run together. And I have become a private practice owner. And so I'm a co-owner of Smart Eye Care. We have 3 primary eye care locations. So in Augusta, Bangor, and Farmingdale. We have 7 full-time ODs. In Maine, you have to do a little bit of everything. So we have a very kind of medical heavy practice, but we also do a little bit of specialty contact lenses, myopia control. And then about 1.5 years ago, because I do a lot of dry eye, we opened up the Smart Eye and Med Spa. So that's kind of our 4th location that houses our dry eye center and does a lot of medical aesthetics. Kind of outside our scope, we have some people on staff that tackle just that part of it. So altogether, I think we have about 56, 57 employees currently. And, you know, it's been a ride, it's been a journey. And so every year, this is kind of my favorite time of year because I sit down with my 2 business partners and we think about where we were, where we're going. And so I was excited to kind of put this together because it's fun to kind of get ideas and think about, you know, how you're going to implement those. And so, you know, being a business owner, right, or being an optometrist, I'm always looking of ways of how we can grow, how we get better, how we can do things a little bit differently so that everyone just has maximum enjoyment and value. And so I feel like I'm always brainstorming, right? And if you are a brainstormer, ideas can come pretty easily, especially like once you start, you know, making a list and staying pretty plugged in. But the harder part sometimes is like the implementation piece of it. So you can have all these great ideas, but if you can't figure out a way how to implement them, like it's kind of a bummer because your ideas aren't going to come to fruition. And so hopefully by, you know, the end of this, maybe it'll spur some creativity or maybe, you know, we can learn from each other of how we can kind of implement these amazing ideas that we have. And I also think that, you know, with implementation, it really doesn't matter what size of practice you have or what sort of setting you're in, whether you're an owner, whether you're an associate, you know, being able to implement any new kind of idea, anybody can do that. So hopefully, regardless of where you're at, this will be really helpful. Another thing with like entrepreneurship in general, and I remind myself this time every year that it's okay to fail, right? So sometimes you can have these really great ideas, you can have a really clear implementation, strategy or how you're going to outline it. And sometimes it just doesn't fall, and that's totally okay. That's par for the course, basically. And so just use it as a reminder, you know, don't get discouraged by that, especially if you're looking back to where you were last year or through the turbulent COVID times or whatever it may be. It's totally okay to fail. And in fact, that's encouraged because that's how you can learn. That's how you can be better and go from there. So thinking ahead of like the next, 2023, my practice, thankfully, is fairly solid, right? Like we already have a lot of the bells and whistles technology wise. We have a rock, core kind of solid group of people. This year we're not actively looking to add like new locations in. And so when I was looking ahead at the next year, what I really wanted us for my practice to do is to kind of go back to the basics, because every so often it's good to go back to those basics. And the basics hold true for if you have, 90 million locations or you have a small boutique practice. And so kind of going back to the basics kind of helped me formulate just a reminder of what I want the next year to look like. So I love the number 7. So I always say like lucky number 7. And so generally every year I try to come up with like 7 things. Now 7 may be too many for you. 7 may not be enough for you, right? Like every practice is different. Every practice owner's personality is a little bit different. And so for me, I try to find that sweet spot of 7. So we're going to talk about all these, but all these kind of the 7 ideas is that what I'm going to kind of focus on implementing is definitely fine tuning that employee engagement, looking really deep diving on how we can make that a little bit better, looking at the overall patient experience. I want to expand our team a little bit. We have some areas where we could use a few more staff members to help us do more things. Communication, there's all different types, and we're going to talk about that. But going back to the basics there and really figuring out how we can implement a really effective communication style, I think will be very helpful for my practice. Growing the business, which we'll talk what that means. DEI, right? Diversity, all of the inclusion stuff. I really want our practice to focus on that. And then there's a little bit of new technology that I definitely want to add in. So let's think about that. So the first thing that I really want to focus on kind of internally is that employee engagement. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm always trying to be super observant. So anywhere I go, anywhere in life, any business, any restaurant, any organizations, I'm always trying to observe to figure out like what are things that they're doing well, what systems do they have in place that maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel on. And so when I think about the employee engagement, when I go into businesses, and you guys too, when you walk in those businesses where the employees are engaged, right? Like you can just tell, it just has a different feel about it, has a different energy, to a sense. And you want to have a workplace that has your employees that are very engaged. So what is employee engagement? Well, definition wise, it's the degree to which employees invest their cognitive, their emotional, and their behavioral energies towards kind of a positive organizational outcome, right? So we all, we've heard happy wife, happy life, but I think in the professional world, happy employees really make your work life pretty happy. And so really engaging them and taking time to kind of go back to this will have long-term reward benefits for sure. With employees, we want them to be enthusiastic about their work. We want them to enjoy coming to the office today. Part of that engagement also kind of taps into the idea that employees, when they are engaged, have a greater sense of meaning in what they do. And that translates, right? Like patients see that, our customers see that, our team sees that. And another way to kind of the engagement piece is really kind of focusing on what their strengths are and playing those up so that maybe they're a leader, whatever their role is, making sure that those two are in sync. And generally, if it is more in sync, we're naturally going to see a little bit more engagement from our employees in that sense. Another way to really kind of hone in on that employee engagement is just hopefully you have employees when they are engaged, they're looking for ways that they can grow, that they can learn new things, right? This is the technician that sees something on like an Aptos photo and comes in and is like, hey doc, what is this, right? Taking the time to kind of nurture that or deep dive into learning about new frame designs or new piece of eye care technology. When all of that is kind of honed in, those are signs of employee engagement. And when they're bringing their best selves to work, they're going to be happier. Your workday is going to be a lot smoother. Everybody's just going to win-win all the way around. So what is employee engagement? Like, how do you actually implement that, right? Like, I think we can all agree that that's a good thing, but how do you implement it? And I hear sometimes with some of my friends who also own businesses, like, how do you do this when you're, balling on a budget, basically? And so sometimes it's as simple as just looking at their job descriptions or what their titles are. So I love this kind of trend that I'm seeing in a lot of practices of kind of renaming job titles, like a director of first impressions. That's probably like your front desk person, an ocular hygienist, maybe that's a technician, or if you have a dry eye center, kind of tapped into that. The experience ambassador, frame stylist, optician extraordinaire, right? these, maybe having a different name or a different title or being fun and innovative doesn't cost you any money really, but this might be a simple thing or a simple tweak to really engage your employees a little bit more. So don't be afraid to, I put this as an example to just think outside the box, right? It doesn't always have to be these big extravagant things. Sometimes it's just going back to, what their title is or what their description is and changing things there. I'm a big fan of one way to implement employee engagement is to really focus on training. When people are comfortable what they do, they know their skill set, there's opportunities to learn and grow or to clarify any confusion that's there, that naturally starts to bring some engagement. So training, right? So, training sometimes is perfecting an individual skill set. Maybe it's taking better photos, better scans, how to, train an INR for specialty contact lenses. But then I also think you equally need some kind of company training, right? Like going back to the basics on what our vision statement is. How do you have good customer service? Running through those kind of different scenarios. So when you're establishing these implementation, looking at training both at the individual skill level and then kind of at the bigger picture can be super helpful. I'm also a big proponent for our leaders. So at each of our locations, we have an office manager, we have a product manager that's separate to that. We have an IT manager. And so they're in those management roles, but we want them to become better leaders, right? Because they're leading their teams at their individual offices. And so really offering them some specialized individual leadership training, whether that's sitting, taking a leadership course, a class together, reading a book and discussing it. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but also kind of honing in on that when, that makes them be engaged at their leadership level. Some of my favorite kind of team trainings, because then you also kind of have to keep that team training dynamic there. Active listening, which I'll give you an example of in a little bit. Of course, the, bread and butter team building, we all know sometimes those can be cheesy, but it is important to kind of go back to that. Education on literally anything that involves the office eyes, that can be very helpful. And then sometimes it's just advancing a skill set, right? Like if somebody wants to do something more, keep it interactive, keep them growing, keep it fun. Those can be ways to do that. Another way to kind of implement how you can get that employee engagement is that you have to really invest in your employees too. And this day and age, part of that is compensation. And so you have to be able to, pay people appropriately. And of course, that's going to vary per region that you're in, per credentials, and there's a lot of different ways. But, that is something that is important. And so you definitely want to kind of play ball there. Looking at your benefits and incentives, right? So maybe it's not just like your 401k with the match and your health and dental insurance. For my office, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, for our leaders, we have like a wellness benefit, and our doctors have a wellness benefit. They get a certain amount of money each year to put towards anything that's kind of helping them be better from a wellness perspective. So get creative, think outside the box there in ways that you can kind of incentivize to kind of drone up some of that engagement from your employees. And then definitely not skimping on employee morale, right? So at the core, employee morale doesn't cost a lot. It's really just how you treat others. Employees want to be respected. They want to be trusted. Those are the foundational pieces of it. But, having a culture where their voice matters, that's very positive, keeping it upbeat and fun, all those morale things can definitely kind of play a bigger role down the road. So how has my team done it? And, as far as investing and as far as implementation, we're going to continue to do these things, but I just wanted to throw some ideas out here, not because they're perfect, but just, to kind of get the wheels spinning a little bit. So for our offices, for all of our employees, we do an education allowance. So we really encourage and require all of our people to be, certified para-optometrics. And so each year, to keep that credential up, they have a certain allowance basically that they can seek continuing education for. We do boot camps usually 2 times a year where we bring all offices together and we do some group training on like the patient experience, how to have better customer service. Our docs will prevent cases to kind of deepen that clinical understanding. That can be really helpful with things like triaging. And even though it's a missed day from clinic, beefing up those skills more than kind of long-term wise financially pays for itself. We also usually do an office retreat every year, and our office retreat is really kind of meant more for like a fun day, and our boot camps are more of like a training day. But depending on your location, your retreat might be a little bit of a hybrid of that. Any sort of different rewards. So every year, and sometimes even once a quarter, we come up with different ways and rewards to kind of recognize our employees for the work that they do, for their talents that they share with us. And so it's really fun to kind of plan those, but it's also fun because our employees just love those things. One really cool thing that we did probably about 4 or 5 years ago now is that we created this wellness initiative. And so we picked kind of 6 different pillars. So, what is wellness? So physical wellness, financial wellness, social, emotional, intellectual, nutritional. And so we have different personal challenges each month, whether it's like steps or trying to get X number of hours of sleep or drinking this much water. We've brought in experts to talk about how to, build and maintain a personal budget, how to start investing. We brought in somebody to teach you how to do meditation. We brought in an emotional specialist to kind of talk about things that you can do to calm yourself down when you're in a heated situation, aka when somebody at the front desk, a patient is screaming at you because they don't want to pay their copay. So we've tried to kind of really find ways that fit within these pillars that can help grow our employees outside of the, kind of quote unquote clinical skill set. And this was a really fun way that really quickly changed our kind of office morale in a very positive direction. And so it's really fun when we onboard new people and we tell them about this, like they always get really excited. So that might not be for you, but maybe that'll like spin an idea of, another way that we can do it. Here in the photos, this top left one, we had a budgeting thing. And so we bought everybody like a Dave Ramsey book for just kind of like starting basics. And so all of us, the employees read it, and then we just kind of talked about it and people kind of set goals. The photo on the top right, we brought in a massage therapist to do some chair massages, to just kind of give a little bit of stress relief, bring some awareness to how to kind of best manage that. The bottom left photo, that's the emotional specialist that we had, where she was telling us how to kind of breathe and walk through what happens when you encounter a really heated situation. And then over on the right, we brought in, and we do this pretty regularly too, for our staff to be kind of CPR trained and certified. So kind of growing in a different way there. So as far as, other ways of how you can kind of really implement kind of an employee engagement, just learn what they like, right? Like starting out, what is their personality? A lot of times in each of our offices, we'll do like the little love language quiz, because everybody, ticks a little bit differently. And so when you know that somebody's different and you know what their strengths are and how they like to be rewarded or how they handle conflict, that can kind of provide a better overall team dynamic. But sometimes it's also just asking like what they want to do to receive rewards. Like sometimes people are motivated by financial rewards. Sometimes people want time off. So maybe adjusting PTO. Sometimes people just want, praise, a pat on their back, telling them they did a good job, or they want that really positive feedback. And sometimes gifts, like everybody has different things that motivate them, and it's okay to mix it up and it's okay to be different. But figuring out kind of how your team ticks is really important. And I will say that sometimes the larger that you get, so now we have 57 employees, we have, now 4 locations. And so I feel like the bigger we grow, the not harder that it gets, but the more awareness that we have to have on this, because you have to kind of go back to the basics and make sure that those little things just aren't getting missed. So, office culture, again, another way to really kind of implement that employee engagement. If you don't have the foundation, that positive company culture, the employee engagement is kind of going to go through the window. So, and really that comes down to like your everyday experiences, right? Your values, you want to establish trust, you want to create a dynamic that really fosters collaboration. And when you have that there, when employee morale is good, then that just kind of starts to stem some of that employee engagement. So if you're in a setting that needs a little bit of tune up for the office culture, deep dive into that. You know, we've had to do that. I've had to do that. And it can feel like a really daunting year when you're climbing out of that, but there's a lot of different ways, and it's worth putting the time in. And it's really kind of that foundational piece before you can really start to engage your employees. The way that we did that actually is that we started implementing kind of the ideas behind this particular book. I'm not selling this book. Find what works for you. I'm just sharing what works for us. And it's called The Ideal Team Player. And it basically says that the ideal team player has 3 attributes: somebody who's humble, somebody, you know, who leaves their ego at the door, somebody who's smart, not just intellectually smart, but more emotionally smart, and then somebody who's hungry, you know, not craving a pizza hungry, but like hungry as in like a self-starter, wanting to learn more. And so we have kind of set this, and over the last year, I feel like my practice has moved away from this a little bit. And so as I implement it for 2023, I want to go back to like our basics and our roots of anytime we bring somebody in, when we're screening candidates, we're screening them to see kind of where they fall with these 3 categories. And the ideal player kind of has this like perfect balance, or if they don't have this perfect balance, they have an awareness of what their strength is, and you work on kind of offsetting the other 1 or 2 that is maybe a little bit behind. So that works really well for us. Find what works for you. But we're definitely kind of going to go back to this and revisit that because it's done really well for our practice. Second thing that I really want to implement is getting back to communication. So communication is huge, right? I love these communication quotes. If you have brilliant ideas, but you can't get them across, your ideas really aren't going to go anywhere. A lot of the problems in the world would be solved if we talk to each other instead of about each other, right? We all know that sometimes office drama can pop up. The most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said, right? That's also part of that kind of emotional intelligence. Going back to kind of the core pieces of it is really huge. So internal communication. So effective communication internally and externally is super important. But what does internal communication look like? So obviously it's face-to-face interactions, but it's even emails to each other or different like instant messages. You know, in my office, we instant message each other quite a bit. And so all of that is a form of communication that we need to make sure that we're using in always a productive, positive way. Meetings, being aware of the different nonverbal things. And communication definitely takes practice. It's something that I feel like we always have to revisit, all of us, in order to be, make sure that we're implementing it effectively. So for my team, what we're going to do when we kick off our January meeting is to remind all of us what the difference between positive and negative communication is, right? It sounds so basic, and it is. But, reminding my employees that a smile goes a long way, eye contact, a nod, praise, good posture, all of that really plays in, and, not overlooking kind of those foundational basics, basically, for positive communication. I'm a big proponent of active listening. And so anybody in my office, especially, I'm always like, are you active listening? Are we active listening? And so we do a lot of exercises, and we pretty much do this once a quarter because it's so super important. One of my favorite exercises to kind of kick off this is to have like 2 of your staff members sit back to back, and you have one person that has an object, and you have another person that's going to draw what the other person is describing their object. So let's say like person A has a pen in front of them, and they're back to back and they're describing it, and the other person is listening to it and drawing kind of what they're hearing. And that's super helpful because it makes you can think that you're communicating clearly, but somebody that's hearing something might totally be on a completely different page than what you're at. And so sometimes with our patients or even one another, especially in heated situations, it can sound like we're getting our point across, but the goal of the exercise is to kind of take a step back and think about what your communication actually looks like. Maybe what could the other person be perceiving? And so I really love this exercise. There's a lot of different examples. This is one just to kind of just put an example out there. External communication. So this is things, with your patients, with your different communities. So it starts with your website, your contact us form, your office reminders, whether you're doing a phone call or doing office texting. But I want to, for us, for 2023, we haven't revisited this in a couple years, but to go through this and look, like, is it sending a clarity? Is it sending the tone? Does it make sense? Is it easy to read? So even though it's out there, but I want us to revisit that to make sure that we're doing the best external communication possible. And then focusing on how to kind of communicate that value to patients. So we're going to definitely train on this at our office meetings, as well as our upcoming boot camps, and kind of basically train on elevator pitches. So we're really involved with our Chamber of Commerce. And so once a month, our Chamber of Commerce will do events. And so my team members are there. And so I want them that if they say, well, what does Smart Eye Care do? I want all of my employees to kind of have this elevator pitch, basically, so that they can be able to explain that to a person, because that's a reflection, that's a mode of effective external communication that we can kind of hone in on. So, how do you communicate value? So sometimes when you're training staff, you have to break it down pretty simply. You have to basically give them the words and the verbatim pieces sometimes to kind of get them going in the right direction. And then, of course, they can kind of make it their own. So for my team, what we're going to do is, when we're communicating values, the benefits of having an exam at Smart Eye Care versus somewhere else is that we really will take a personalized, kind of individualized approach, and not just like a copy and paste approach. I want our team to really highlight that we use a lot of modern day technology, which is great. We have amazing doctors on our team. They're very highly trained. They have amazing bedside manner. I also take really pride that our practice only prescribes or recommends what a patient truly needs. We never sell. We always come from the point of solving problems. And I never want us to have a reputation that's different than that. And then, of course, for optometry as a whole, right? Like the importance of kind of a comprehensive ocular health exam, right? And so being able to communicate that. So we're going to train on that, and we're going to practice, and people are going to practice, saying this verbatim. We're also going to train on how to communicate value for the benefits of purchasing contact lens benefits at our particular practice, and what the benefit of purchasing glasses at our practice are versus like buying it down the road or buying it online. Going back to the basics training, you can't assume that staff are going to know how to do this. You have to train them on it and give them the tools and the skill set that they need so that they can effectively communicate. The other thing that we're really going to kind of hone in on is that patient experience, right? So what is the patient experience? Well, it's the impression of patients that they have when they visit you, or just what they have of your brand as a whole, through all aspects, kind of all those different touch points of the patient's journey. When you have a really positive patient experience, you're going to have patients that are more loyal. Your patient retention is going to be there. It's going to build a lot of positive awareness about your brand. And then ultimately that's going to translate to business growth, business success, which, who doesn't want that point of it? So the patient touch points. So, I like this, and I like revisiting this with my staff, because sometimes it's easy to just focus on what happens inside the office, but the patient experience starts way before they even set foot in your door, right? It starts with like your digital presence. Do you have a website? Is it current? Is it up to date? What do your social media accounts look like? When somebody calls, are they able to get through to a person? Is there a voicemail system? Are those phone calls, returned in a appropriate time? Can they text the office in a day and age where that's really important? What does the language look like on that? Is it easy? Does it look super robot-y? Being mindful of that part of it. And then, starting outside the office, what does your parking lot look like? What does the entry to your building look like? Sometimes we don't always go in the front door that our patients go in. We might park and go in a back door or kind of a staff entrance, but is there like, a giant cobweb out front, right? Or is there ice that's making it a little bit slippery? Or are there like cigarette butts out front, right? So taking a step back, walking through kind of your patient's shoes, focusing on those little details can be really helpful. What is check-in like? Is it smooth? Is it friendly? Is it warm and inviting? Do they feel annoyed because we didn't gather any of their insurance information? What does that process look like? When they're sitting in the waiting room, are they learning about cool new products and services that you have? Does it feel calm? Does it smell good? Does it feel clean? The preliminary testing, right? Kind of the same thing. Is everything explained? We know why we know why it's important to do a dilated eye exam or, a retinal screening potentially. The exam portion of it, as docs, we have a really good control over that piece of it. Are we taking the time to really educate our patients? Are we sending them home with appropriate material or recommendations? Because sometimes in the exam, it's like information overload. What does that handoff look like from the exam to either your optical or kind of that payment checkout piece of it? If a patient needs any sort of follow-up, what does that process look like? So going through all those patient touch points, doing some training, and kind of going back to the basics of that, that's something that my office is really going to focus on for this next year. And then figuring out a way to measure it, right? So it's cool if you do this and you can find ways to maybe improve it, but how are you going to, really assess if it's better or not? Is that just your personal opinion going through it? Or maybe, you could implement some satisfaction survey results. Maybe you could, kind of actually just talk to your patients, right? Especially if you have some friends that are going through it, like just ask them and create a thing for honest, open feedback. Like, what was your experience? What would you have liked to have seen better? What was great? And put yourself in their shoes. And another great way is to look at your patient retention, right? Are you having a lot of patient turnover, or are people pretty loyal and they're coming back to back? That can also kind of be a reflection of where you're at. As far as technology, for my practice, we're not building any kind of heavy hitters other than we're bringing in TearCare. We currently have a LipiFlow. I'm really interested in this to accommodate different eye size. So that's kind of maybe really the only tech piece that I'm interested in, but I'm wanting to kind of tap into other areas of technology. So Airtable, I'm wanting to use this for our social media planning. It's a calendar and you can basically pre-post everything. We also use Hootsuite quite a bit, but using kind of that organizational method in a different way, hopefully will be really helpful for us. Our leadership team just started using Monday.com as a way for like project management. And so I really want to for us to use that pretty effectively for the next year. We also have Microsoft Teams. So all of our office communication, company calendar is with that, but I feel like not all of our team uses that. And so as far as the implementation, getting everybody up to speed. And then I really want to make some training videos. So sometimes I feel like it's great if you do an in-office training, but sometimes when you bring new people on board, or if you start thinking about how you want to grow to multiple locations, if you kind of have something that's a video recording, a training that somebody could listen to and you guys could talk about, just ways to kind of diversify that and use technology that doesn't have a lot of startup costs to our advantage. Another big thing that I'm wanting to implement is to bring just more awareness to my practice about diversity and inclusion. And being in Maine, our patient population just naturally isn't that diverse, which is a real bummer. And so I, don't have a ton of experience with it, but dang it, a year from now, I'm going to be in a much better position with our practice. But as far as implementing that, I want to start by bringing in an expert and then sitting down with them and figuring out how we can get our team, kind of even just more awareness, more educated on this, the importance of this value of it. And so I don't have a lot to comment on it yet, other than we have this idea. And as far as implementing, I have a plan in place on how we're going to roll this out. The other implementation piece of it is expanding the team. So our team is growing, which is great. Our hiring, our onboarding process, our retention is pretty good, but I definitely want to be mindful this day and age of still trying to minimize turnover. Turnover is very expensive, really kind of focusing on turnover rates and seeing if there's any office or any certain department that maybe there's a trend that's popping up. Exit interviews are a huge one, and we just started doing this actually a couple months ago, which I don't know why we didn't do it before, but for 2023 we're definitely going to do that. I think that that's, from an HR standpoint, very important. So if you're not doing that, highly encourage you to do that. Also focusing on the, attracting the right candidates, looking at the onboarding process. Part of that has to do with your office culture and your morale. Celebrating those milestones with your team, your work anniversaries is huge. And then the review system. So we, a couple of years ago, had kind of put a certain review system in place that every 6 months our employees are reviewed. And so we're doing that, but trying to kind of diversify those reviews a little bit so that's not just necessarily kind of employee performance. Another thing that, as far as wanting to implement, and the big thing for this 2023 year, is just overall growth with the practice, and not necessarily of adding a lot of different locations in that sense, but focusing on that financial growth. Over the course of the last couple of years, we've done really well financially, which is great. But we all know that, as a practice owner, the cost of your frames, the cost of your materials is going up. The wage of what you employ, the wages that you employ your employees are definitely increasing. And so being mindful then of ways that you can still kind of strategically grow financially so that you can kind of keep that upwards trend is helpful. So for us, we're going to really focus on increasing sales, looking at those KPIs, those key performance indicators, and then again, adaptability, right? So if there's anything we've learned over the last little bit, is that sometimes you have to pivot quite a bit. It's okay to fail, but having a really kind of successful practice, part of that is being able to kind of lead through change, being able to be pretty nimble so that you can be adaptable for whatever comes down the pike, essentially. So how can you grow your practice financially? Well, focusing on the margins, kind of back to the basics there. Increase income, decrease expenses as best that you can, but also having a financial strategy and, reevaluating that. Is our financial strategy working? Do we need to revamp it? Do we need to pivot and do something different? So far ours is working, but, I want to, for 2023, make sure that we're staying on top of it and make sure that we're not deviating from that at all. So KPIs and, benchmarking is really huge. And there's so many different kind of KPIs that you can do. Some big ones that I want to make sure that my practice is, not overlooking, even though we track this, but talking about it at our owner meetings, talk about at our leadership meetings, and developing strategies on it are, looking at our gross revenue per exam, looking at how many exams per OD hour that we're doing. Is there a sweet spot? If one doc is doing more exams but is having less revenue, right? Is that kind of deflecting from the patient experience, or is it more that we just need to overall see more patients? Looking at gross revenue per staff hour, this is a really appropriate way to see if you're appropriately staffed. And so as we're always looking at, the staff ratios and offsetting on our, bottom line, being able to kind of hold a good grasp on that is helpful. And then also kind of tracking gross revenue per square footage of our office space. For one of my offices, we footprint wise have a very small office, and I feel like we're kind of busting at the seams. So starting to kind of look at that, because hopefully over the next maybe 5 years or so, we'll be in a different physical location for that, a bigger office. And so looking at what that is now for this next year so that we know how to appropriately plan for down the road. And then, looking at those expense ratio ranges, again, back to the basics, but sometimes in order to be successful, you have to go back to the basics. And then when you're looking at these KPIs, developing a strategy, right? It's all about implementation. You can have these great ideas. You can identify these things that you want to improve upon, But if you don't have a strategy to kind of get you there, it's only going to amount to so much. So, maybe for us, this is like, our doctors, all 7 of our docs are prescribing and recommending from the chair. Our opticians always bringing up kind of multiple pairs, hobby glasses, sunglasses, looking at our inventory as a whole, kind of reviewing with our opticians the different add-ons that are there, looking at our capture rate, not just for glasses, but for annual contact lens exam capture rate, maybe our Optos capture rate. It's always important, I think, to look at your exam fee assessment. We know that prices everywhere are going up, so don't be afraid to revisit that if you feel it's appropriate. We worked hard to be able to provide the care that we do, and I think that we should be paid, well, fairly, very appropriately. So as a whole, 7 things that I'm kind of, focusing on. Hopefully maybe these will get the wheels turning for you for this next year. But I hope that, maybe you have some ideas that inspire you. But I think the biggest take home for all this is that you have to be able to implement it, right? You have to be able to have a game plan of how you're going to put those wheels into motion. And maybe that works, which is great. And maybe sometimes you need to pivot and do something different or tweak a little thing. That's okay too. But I know that Coop is on, and so we're going to kind of do some questions. But I want to thank you for your time. If you have a great idea that you want to share or any questions along the way, this is my email address. I'm on Instagram. So if you want to find any, private practice things, I'll do a lot of clinical things, a lot of dry eye things. Also, a lot of things about my golden retriever dog generally pop up. But I'd love to connect with you there if you're out and on the socials. So, Coop, I know you're on. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I got one for you. By the way, great presentation here. I think you covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time, especially on implementation, which we both know does take a lot of effort and energy in your practice. And I think anyone that's on this in this presentation will admit to that. I got another book for you, and really for the group. You talked about the ideal player, but let's go the other direction a little bit for the audience. Give another recommendation: The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Similar sort of style of this kind of parable, but it talks about the other side, not just the ideal portions, but the non-ideal portions that we kind of tend to also get into. So just a food for thought. I'll put it in the chat in a moment. But I want to ask you a question. I think it's kind of one of those introspective ones. If you can think back, and I'm sure there could be plenty of instances, but what was the aha moment for you on driving practice efficiency?
The aha moment for sure, honestly, it came down to finances. So about a year into owning the practice, we sat down and we had 3 locations, and really we're trying to kind of grow those and scale those. And we looked at, why is there for some of our locations such a big spread financially, right? And so we have great doctors, right? You know what I mean? The patients were not dramatically different demographics. And so we started looking at like the efficiency and the flow through the office, and how the handoff efficiency, it's back to all those basics, but one office did it amazingly well, one did it pretty good, and then one needed a little bit of groundwork. And so seeing that split on our books, financial books, was kind of the aha moment. But then the other aha moment was like, once we identified that, we made changes. And then a year later, when we looked at that and we looked at our KPIs, it was like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. But I would say that was an aha moment for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that thematic part about back to basics really plays a role in how we kind of implement things in general, but also just the execution. I think you kind of really laid that out very nicely in a lot of your points, your top 7, which by the way is also my lucky number. So shamelessly, it's a very good one. But yeah, I know I think you did a wonderful job here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming in to do this today. And I do want to pretty much end up here with giving everyone something what they want to ask for, which is the lovely raffle code. And so the raffle code for this session is LASIK.